Hey there, everybody. Alec Crispin here, your relevant, or since this is going outside of my particular class, maybe your irrelevant TA for POLI 231, Intro to Political Theory. I am recording a couple videos on some of the thinkers that I saw in the survey that I sent out were the most confusing for a lot of students, and this is the one on Hume and Burke. I just wanted to clarify what these videos are for, what they're going to be more useful for. These videos cannot and should not stand in for you going back and rereading the thinkers. These videos are best understood for two purposes. One, you can watch them beforehand to get sort of an idea of the broad strokes of what a particular thinker thinks, so that you understand, for instance, that Burke is against the social contract, and so if you're reading Burke and you see him and he says, looks like he's saying something where he's saying the social contract is good, you might not know what he means, but at least you know he can't mean that. So you ignore that possible reading and look for others that are more likely to be accurate. These can kind of point you in the right direction when reading and sort of bound your interpretations in a useful way. And the other thing they're useful for and mainly intended for is if you've gone back through the readings, if you've watched the lectures, if you've done everything you need to that everyone should have already done at this point, and you're doing that, this is a way of explaining some of the harder points about them in just another way, another person saying it, another mode of saying it, such that maybe it helps get it into your brain via different means, because this is really complicated stuff, and so I wanted to provide this kind of thing, particularly before the big review session on Monday. So, Hume and Burke, the anti-contractarians, and, as I read them, the conservatives not in terms of their own time, like Professor VMF said, but in terms of that they're very influential on modern conservatism, and their ideas had a lot of purchase in that direction. And they are, most importantly for us, vicious critics of the social contract mindset as represented in Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, mostly as represented in Locke and Rousseau. Hume's kind of angling against Locke, and Burke is kind of angling against Rousseau, and against what he sees as out-of-control Rousseauianism as present in the French Revolution. But they're both attacking social contracts in general. Now, on the papers, the most common mistake I saw across the entire papers in terms of comprehension was people misunderstanding Hume's core point against the social contract theory. So I want to hit that point and make it really clear, say it another way. So a lot of people said and wrote that Hume's idea of legitimacy, the legitimacy of the state in Hume, comes from usurpation and conquest. This is false. This is just not what Hume believes. But I think Hume has a story for why you think it's what Hume believes. Here's what Hume would say. If you went to Hume, if Hume were grading your essay, look at how arrogant I am putting myself in the feet of Hume. But I think if Hume were grading these essays and he read, Hume thinks that the social contract, that legitimacy of the state is found in usurpation and conquest, Hume would say, why are you looking to the moment of the origin of the state for state legitimacy? Hume would say, I'm critiquing the contractarians, and that right there, looking to the moment of origin for legitimacy, that is the classic contractarian move. So by reading me, Hume, as saying that legitimacy comes from the moment of conception of the state, and the moment of conception of state is most often a moment of usurpation and conquest, you're making the precise contractarian mistake that I, Hume, am urging you not to make. Usurpation and conquest in Hume is not incompatible with legitimacy, in the way that for a contractarian it would be, right? Consent is what is required for legitimacy. For at least Locke and Rousseau, usurpation and conquest is not compatible with consent. For Hobbes, it might be, right? Hobbes is fine with putting a gun to your head and saying, make a choice. He thinks that's a legitimate choice you're making. But Hume's going to say, usurpation and conquest are not incompatible with legitimacy, but they're not the source of it. Hume is cagey about the source of it. Hume doesn't explicitly say what his theory of legitimacy is. But insofar as he offers one near the end of the piece, he talks about usefulness as the source of legitimacy. He talks about if the state is doing basically good enough things for you, good enough, not perfectly good, not good according to some arbitrary standard, arbitrary set of rights, right? These are the two conservative thinkers, anti-contractarian thinkers. They are against abstract ahistorical rights. And Hume goes, if the government is useful enough to you, then you are, echoes of what I talked about in the Weber lecture, you are going to treat it as though it's legitimate most of the time, right? And Hume has a particular kind of move that he does when he talks about this. Hume talks about how he goes to the contractarians and he sort of asks them, why should I listen to the government? I didn't consent to it. I didn't sign no social contract. And the social contractarians, all of them, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, say, okay, you didn't sign the social contract, but, and Professor VMF talked about this in the last class video, he goes, but you would have consented, so we can treat you as having had consented. And Hume goes, okay, all right, why would I have consented? And the contractarians then start talking about how useful the government is. And Hume goes, aha, I caught you, see. You said promise, consent, was what made government legitimate. But when I pushed you on that, now you're saying you would consent because these things are useful. So it must be utility. It must be usefulness. That is the source of government legitimacy. And not promise, not consent, not contract. What you saw most often in the essays was students going, Hume has this criticism. He says that the contract, that legitimacy is based on usurpation and conquest, wrong. And then they said, but the contract is useful, so that's why you'd sign the contract. They used Hume's biggest argument against the contractarians, his kill shot on the contractarians, as though it defended the contractarians' position. This is completely misunderstanding what Hume is all about. The way you would actually respond to Hume is, you would have the contractarians, you try to imagine, okay, they hear Hume's argument about why it's actually utility and not consent. How would the contractarians then say, no, it's actually about consent because X, Y, and Z? I don't know what X, Y, and Z are right now. But that's how you answer Hume's objection. The fact that the social contract is useful, appealing to usefulness, is making Hume's point against the contractarians. It's not defending them. Because of its usefulness, if usefulness is the real ground of legitimacy, then it's not consent. And Hume's point more broadly is, maybe consent is a way, he hedges at one point, maybe consent is a way of establishing legitimacy. But look over the vast majority of human history. Look at all these people that lived according to way different social standards, way different cultures, way different notions of what the state is supposed to do. And he goes, maybe contract can be a basis for consent. But it is not the only way, it is not even the most common way. And here you have these crazy Lockeans, he's saying, arguing that the only legitimate governments are founded on contracts designed to protect life, liberty, and property. And he goes, I don't know what world you're looking at. That doesn't make any sense to me. And he says he attacks the contractarians on another point to move to his ideas on property, and this will bring us into Burke. Hume goes, it's not like there's this abstract concept of property and an idea of justice that requires respect for property that exists in our minds from because we were made in God's image and because if we would but consult our reason, we would realize that the natural law requires us to respect property, lock, right? Because that's not how it works at all. What happened was, dozens, maybe hundreds of generations ago, two people, Oog and Ugg, living in their huts in the Neolithic era, Oog kind of pointed at this patch and was like, don't touch this stuff. I want to keep it. The other person goes, okay, but you took stuff from over here and that's over by my hut. Maybe they talked and they went, okay, I won't take the stuff by your hut and you won't take the stuff by my hut. And then they teach their kids, we don't take the stuff by Oog's hut. And Ugg's kids teach their kids, you don't take the stuff over by Oog's hut. And we realize that this is useful. This is a good thing for us to do, right? Humanity across a whole bunch of different places realizes this. Not every place, Different places have different needs. Maybe other places had so much abundance they didn't have really a need for hardcore property rights, right? A hardcore idea of, I keep yours, you keep mine. But Ugnaught, they make this agreement, and their kids share it down the line, and their kids say, we don't take the stuff by their hut, they don't take the stuff by our hut. And they share it down, and over time, over generations and generations of communicating this idea, it hardens into a moral principle that property should be respected. But this moral principle is, and Hume wouldn't have this vocabulary, but it's kind of what he thinks, it's a social construction. It's not ontologically real. It's not a fact inherent in human reason, the way Locke would say it is. It's something that this society created because they found it useful. And generation after generation, it hardens into something that looks like an immutable moral principle. Maybe even a principle so important the vast majority of English common law is based on it. And you start hashing out principles of exchange for property, ideas of theft, ideas of the appropriate punishment for theft and versus grand theft. And this principle gets worked out in reaction to the concrete circumstances experienced within British civilization as it developed. Hume's critique of Locke here is Locke is taking this contingent historical understanding of property that's very popular in the Anglosphere, and he is eternalizing it, he is reifying it, he is making it this thing that is innate and fundamental to our natures when it's a product of institutions, and this is where the conservatism comes in, and we'll move into Burke because it's a little more obvious in him. But it's the institutions that provide the basis for this right. And so if someone comes along and says, listen, I've done a bunch of math, and I've done a bunch of first principles reasoning using my Enlightenment, God-given reason, and I've determined that there are these certain abstract rights that we have, no matter who we are, no matter what sort of person we are, no matter what culture we come from, everybody's entitled to these rights. And if an institution does not, on my immediate view, provide these rights, if the institution doesn't give these rights to the level that I expect it should, then we can rip up that institution in the name of our abstract rights. And Hume goes, these institutions are communicating something. They are, the rights that you are trying to protect are grounded in the very institutions that you are willing to throw away for the sake of better preserving and securing the rights. You're going to destroy the foundation for your house. It's like you're ripping out the boards that make up the foundation of your house in order to build this third floor. What are you doing? You can try that, but the house is going to collapse and you don't get to build that third floor. You just don't get to. This is why you argue for, and here's the conservatism, this is why you argue for gradual change, careful change. Change that's based on future historical precedent, and change that is to support historically grounded rights. Not abstract rights that, for a lot of these thinkers who were literally arguing as the Enlightenment was going on, some of these rights were kind of figured out yesterday in intellectual history terms, right? And now you have people willing to rip up whole societies to achieve them, and that's where we get to Burke. With Burke, the biggest problem I saw was students, most people just didn't touch him on their papers, and I think the reason is because they didn't quite know what to do with him. That's understandable. I don't always know what to do with Burke. Because Burke is not a super detail-oriented philosopher that sort of finely picks these things apart, right? He's a politician. He likes to give a good inspirational speech. And we gave you two of his inspirational speeches, one on Marie Antoinette, one on the contract between the generations, which is not a social contract of any kind that the contractarians would recognize. It's almost a parody of contractarianism, right? It's him taking it a totally different way. But most people, when confronted with Burke, they just said something about the sublime, and then they kind of mumble and ask them what they mean by the sublime, and they sort of look confused. And I think what Burke would say is, when he looks at Marie Antoinette, when he sees a beautiful princess, or a beautiful castle, or a beautiful church, he argues, this produces natural feelings. Natural feelings. Burke was a sentimentalist, like Hume. He thought that the emotions were more important than reason and logic. Certainly than detached reason and logic. Hume very famously said, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. Reason tells you how to get what you want, but only the emotions can tell you what you want. And Burke believes that when you see a beautiful cathedral, you see a beautiful princess, you see a beautiful castle, this produces natural feelings in you of deference, natural feelings in you of awe and honor, and an imitative desire to be more like and to offer tribute to. And he thinks this is natural in people, this desire for respectful order. And he thinks these Enlightenment calculators and philosophers and sophists are out there seeding people with these ideas of abstract, ahistorical rights that are convincing people to throw out these social institutions that maintain so much for us, that have worked so well for us. Even the poorest of the poor. In a way, people think of Burke as a defender of privilege, but in a way, Burke sees himself as arguing for the common man. He's like, most common people are amazed by churches. Most common people in Burke's time are religious. Most common people in Burke's time want to keep the monarchy. Most common people in Burke's time respect the traditional systems. And he says, it's all you fancy Enlightenment philosophers sitting in your ivory tower. Think about how some of this has been communicated down the line, right? It's all you fancy philosophers sitting in your ivory tower, telling these people that they ought to be dissatisfied, telling these people that if they don't have these abstract rights, they are being exploited. And he goes, no, I'm speaking for the normal people. They're normal. It's you Enlightenment philosophers inventing these completely ahistorical rights that are the strange ones. And worse, he goes, you're talking about society like it's a contract. You're talking about society like it's just something people agree to for certain prudential reasons, and if they're not getting what they want, they can just throw out the contract anytime they want. And he goes, no. Society is a contract, but it's not like any contract you've ever seen. Because it's a contract between those who are dead, those who are living, and those who are yet to be born. Burke flips the Lockean, Rousseauian kind of idea. Whereas the Lockeans particularly said, and think about Thomas Jefferson, like a hardcore Lockean like Thomas Jefferson, who believed that we should throw out the government every 23 years. He calculated exactly how long a generation was. Again, he's perfect enlightenment, right? I rationally figured out how long a generation is, and so we should have a revolution every 23 years because I did the math on the board. What a way to look at politics, Burke would say. But it's a contract between the generations. You might come along and think, the Lockean goes, what right does the previous generation have to govern the current generation or future generations? And Burke goes, no. Who are you to suddenly throw out everything that came before you? Who are you to suddenly step out of this great intergenerational project? The ends of society cannot be achieved in many generations, is his line. They take multiple generations to do what they need to do. And so we need that continuity. We need that through line in order to achieve the amazing things we've already achieved in society and in order to achieve better things. But you can't just throw out everything that came before in the name of some abstract rights. You just can't. It's unjustifiable. And you're going to, the most important point he makes, you're going to, if you try to make this complicated, historically grounded, culturally situated thing called society conform to the abstract rules you drew up on a board or in a legislature somewhere, based on Enlightenment reasoning principles detached from everything else. If you try to cram this massive world into that tiny box, you are going to have to kill people endlessly to do it. One of the points Professor VMF made in his last lecture was that Burke was terrified about the switch between the early revolution to the terror. What he didn't mention was that Burke wrote this book before the terror happened. Burkeans would say he called it. Burkeans would say Reflections on the Revolution in France is one of the great called shots in the history of political theory. So when you're looking at it, look at it in that context. Understand how he dovetails with Hume. Understand that he's making claims about what society is and what we owe society. What we owe the previous generation and what we have to hand down to the next generation. A lot of Burkeans, hardcore modern Burkeans, are also environmental conservationists. It's a really interesting kind of overlap that doesn't fit the left-right spectrum super neatly, right? Towards a green conservatism. I forget who wrote it, but that's a really interesting article on this topic. But with that, I've talked long enough, so thank you for hearing me out. About 10 minutes on each of the thinkers, so I think I did all right. And yeah, I hope this helps your studying, and I hope you come ready with questions on Monday. See you then.